Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Talktober 2020. I'm Lynn Hall, Mayor of Prince George. And before I get started this evening, I want to recognize a few folks. First of all, I'd like to recognize that we're on the traditional territory of the Lheidli-T'enneh, and I'd like to recognize Chief Poutney for the strong relationship and partnership that we're building with the City of Prince George and the Lheidli-T'enneh. And a huge thanks to Blake Productions, Melanie and Brent and your team for being really the technological gurus of this event this evening. We're in a great studio, a great setting to be able to put Talktober 2020 on. I want to introduce my council colleagues, and because of the advancement of technology, we're in a situation where we've got a couple of councillors who aren't here and they're able to Zoom in. So I'd like to recognize that Councillor Everett, Councillor Skaken, and Councillor McConaughey are with us this evening. Welcome, glad to have you here. And Councillor Ramsey, Councillor Sampson, Councillor Scott, Councillor Frizzell, and Councillor Krause are back at City Hall in our second floor boardroom. So welcome to my colleagues that are here this evening. You know, one of the interesting things about this evening is just that we're in a different era. In 2015, when we started this, never did I think that in 2020 we'd be conducting an online town hall meeting, not face-to-face, but I guess we are face-to-face virtually, but not in the same location. So it has certainly taken on a little different tone this year, but we were adamant about holding the 2020 event. As you know, we took a break in the election year, and we're back, and I think this is our fifth Talktober event. And it's really recognized each fall around this time that Talktober has become a mainstay of the community, and really it becomes part of the fall season, though when we look outside it's more winter than fall. Talktober was really designed for us to be able to give an opportunity to have this one-on-one town hall meeting, but it was also in its early inception an opportunity for our various departments to be represented. And we do have representation here this evening from staff, and I want to introduce our acting city manager, Walter Babich, our deputy acting city manager, Ian Wells, and we do have our senior team on the fifth floor boardroom in City Hall to step in and answer any technical questions that I can't answer or Walt can't answer. So glad to have staff here this evening to be able to assist in this town hall meeting. Just so you all know, the session is being recorded. We're live streamed to the city's Facebook page. And for those of you joining me on Zoom, I encourage you to turn your camera on when it comes time for the Q&A portion of this event. And as I've said for the last 4 years, I'll do my best to answer all of the questions, but may lean on a little support when it comes to the technical parts of the questioning. If I could just for a moment talk a little bit about 2019. And 2019, as you all know, was a stellar year for us. It was a stellar year from a building permit perspective. We hit a record year of about $235 million in building permits. That was huge for us. And we started 2020 really on the same foot, and we had great expectations until mid-March. And then COVID hit, the pandemic hit, and the first cancellation of our events was the World Women's Curling Championship, which really, I think, started the slide to us having to close and really reflect on a number of events that were going to happen. Those events were canceled. We started to close a number of our facilities in the community, and still sort of looking back on 2019 and wondering what this year would have been had we been able to match 2019 under the same circumstances. Interestingly enough, and I'll talk more than just on building, but we heard at our last meeting the September numbers year to date in 2019 were somewhere around $168 million worth of building permits. Well, the numbers that we saw a couple of Mondays ago for year to date 2020 are up to $161 million. We were very surprised by that, but I think that's been the indicative trademark of this city for a few years, the development side of things, and so we're pretty thrilled to have those numbers at 161 million, and we may hit a pretty decent, if not close to a record-breaking year in 2020. So back to the events that were canceled. In all, there was about 100 events postponed or canceled, thousands of lost hotel stays, millions of dollars worth of economic impact to the city of Prince George as a result of this pandemic. So not just the financial and economic impact to our operations because of the loss of revenue, but to hoteliers and restaurateurs across the city who were really depending on the 2020 year and certainly the World Women's Curling Championship to kick that off. Cirque du Soleil was a big piece that we lost, but it really was a tough start from March 16th on. And we're starting to see a bit of a turnaround, but now that we're into the second wave, and I'll comment on that in a minute, we're not sure where we're headed. The city's pandemic response was enhanced cleaning protocols. As you know, we closed a number of civic facilities, excuse me, just about every one of them. Come the end of March, we didn't have much that was open, and that really was an impact. We did, in time, reopen the Aquatic Center, the CN Center, Kin Center, and the Rolling Mix Concrete Arena. And we started to operate council meetings a little differently. If you come to council chambers, you'll see that there's a tremendous amount of change in the chamber. We enhanced access to public washrooms, physical distancing, video, signage, postage. You know, it was really an opportunity for us to follow, because we were mandated to do that. Government put in a provincial emergency plan. We were now glued to the TV and listening to Dr. Henry and the orders that were coming from her. We were absolutely glued to the TV with Minister Dix, Minister Farnworth, a number of people that were giving municipalities directions to follow given the pandemic. And I want to add that over the last few days, we've certainly seen from reports from Dr. Henry that this pandemic is not in our rearview mirror. And I cannot stress the importance of the information orders that we receive from her. And my call out this evening is that each one of us pay particular attention and follow those orders. The financial impacts, as I said, were terrific. We were losing about $1.3 million per month in revenue, and that continued for quite some time. And I will say, despite the fact that we've opened up all of our facilities with the exception of the Four Seasons Pool and the Elk Center rink, revenues are not flowing as you might expect because of the increased cost to us for having to open those facilities. About mid-year, we started to look at what was potentially a recovery plan, and I had said a number of times that municipalities will play a huge role in the recovery and coming out of this pandemic, and I still believe in that very strongly. It's municipalities, through the work we do, that will still continue to create development in our city. We did, in fact, put on hold about $25 million worth of capital projects for this year, but we will revisit those projects through the budget process in the next few months. We still continued with $70 or $80 million worth of capital projects, both below infrastructure and above infrastructure work. And we'll have an opportunity to review that in the coming months. Certainly, we were encouraging residents through our Economic Development Office to buy local. And you've probably all seen the #SupportPG initiative, which is still an important piece of what we're trying to do through our Economic Development Office. Implementing initiatives for a safe, clean, and inclusive community is a committee that I chaired. And despite the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, we still have issues on our streets. We have homelessness issues. We have issues with folks with mental illness, drug addictions. And even though we're seeing it across the country, it's certainly no excuse. And we're not trying to make it an excuse. What we're trying to do is highlight this from coast to coast with both levels of government at the federal and provincial levels. So as we sort of turn the page from the late summer into fall, we're really focusing on a number of things, and throughout this evening and some of the questions we've been asked, we will respond to those, and I think we'll give you a sense of where we're headed over the next few months. The thing that I would like to also let you know is that the 2019 annual report can be seen and reviewed on princegeorge.ca/annual report. That'll give you a great overview of our 2019 activities. So with that, I want to I want to get into some questions. Before, though, I do that, I just want to let folks know that there is an opportunity for you to take a look at the survey that we've got. And if you just look at the screen here to my right, it's princegeorge.ca/get involved. We've had some 350 or 60 responses, which is fantastic. So we're using tonight, and we're also using the survey and the citizen budget to be part of our budget process. So your feedback is important. And I would say that this budget is probably the most important of any that we have had over the last number of years. Importance in the sense that we're coming, hopefully, to a lighter side of the pandemic and moving into 2021. And what does it mean for us? I think what it means for us is that we have to take a look at our financial position, not only for 2021, but set a course and a foundation for 2021 onward for probably 3 to 5 years. And it's an important piece that we identify and look at the responses that we're getting from the survey, look at the responses from the citizen budget, so we have a foundation to work from. So I encourage you to participate in that process. So with that, I want to again thank all of you for participating. Our role here this evening is going to be to respond to some written questions. I've got 2 or 3, but then we're going to move on to those of you that are in by Zoom, excuse me, by Zoom, and we'll take your questions. And we have folks here this evening that will take the questions, and we will be able to hear you and be able to respond. So I think it's just putting up your hand and we'll recognize you and move forward from there. So the first question that I want to deal with comes from Henry. Henry talks about the extension of Foothills Boulevard and says that it should be extended southward from 18th Avenue along the bottom of the Cranbrook Escarpment to connect with Ferry Avenue. And I know this has been a big topic of conversation over the years, a lot of years, I would say, probably a decade or more. But I'm going to add 2 more to that. One is the Ospika extension across from the top of Ospika, Tyner over to Highway 16 West, and a tremendous amount of development in the Creekside area below Malspina Ridge, and the extension of Cowart to the TELUS building. So all 3 of these have created a lot of discussion, and from our perspective, there's no question that they've been on the plan for quite some time. The cost of these 3 particular extensions is enormous. If I can just point to the Ospika Highway 16 connector, that's probably some $25 or $30 million to make that work. So these are on the books. We have staff that have taken a look at them over the years, and we'll continue to look at it, and we'll see how we can drive these projects forward. But again, it's going to take time and it's going to take dollars. So before I go, I think, to the other written submissions, perhaps what I'll do is just turn it over to the folks that are with us on Zoom this evening for any questions that you might have. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming out, and no, we're not going to stop. We're going to continue. So let me go to a couple of written questions that have come in. I got questions from Mike. Mike's question is around trails have long been one of, if not the #1 recreational facility used by residents. This has never been more evident than during certainly the last 8 months, as our parks and trails have been the only recreational facility that has remained fully open and accessible. Capital and maintenance dollars spent on trails have always been vastly and disproportionately smaller than the city's many other recreational facilities. I propose that the city aims to fund its trail infrastructure proportionate to its use. So thanks very much, Mike. And I am going to just ask Gina to give a couple of comments here in a minute, but I want to touch on the Riverside Park, the new Riverside Park just off of Foothills Bridge, which was part of the overall plan to increase not just park space, but walking space, trail space. We had in the 2019 budget looked at a number of expansions. We've got work to do down at various parks, reclaiming various bank lands that have been washed away over a couple of springs. We looked diligently for grants from the federal and provincial government. That's a big piece for us when we're looking at trying to do this reclamation work, or do any work for that matter, but particularly when we're talking about parks. And again, the citizen budget is an opportunity to express your views on our entire park system. Gina, I'm wondering if you can just tell us the kilometers in trails that we have and our current budget allocations and what that looks like for 2021.
Good evening, Mayor Hall. So for 2020, we had $250,000 for our trails rehabilitation projects. We were able to get about 900 meters of rehab done on those trails. This included Tyner Boulevard, Bravery Park, some work in Rainbow Park, major trail upgrade to Connaught Hill, and Forest for the World. The other piece was 570 meters of new trails that were funded as part of capital projects. So that included some new trails in Rombrent Park and also in Freeman Park.
Okay, thanks very much, Gina. And I think it's safe to say that when we start 2020 budget discussions, parks and trails will be a big part of it. And Mike makes a good point when he talks about the only recreation opportunities that people had during the pandemic because we had closed our facilities. We recognize probably in July and August that without the recreation facilities, we were seeing a tremendous amount of folks that were really finding it difficult. The pandemic was starting to close in on them, and they were looking for those recreational opportunities, and that's why we started to move forward with certainly the pool and the walking opportunity at CN Center. So Mike, it's certainly on our list, and I thank you very much for the question. Is there any from the audience this evening? Okay, I'll dive into one from Dawn. Dawn says there was a lot of debate and controversy over opening the sporting facilities, all related to the budget and the deficit which is projected for this year. How did the library get reopened without the same discussion? It represents almost $4 million per year in costs, and I will say that Councillor McConaughey sits on our library board as a representative of council, and the library board operates with an independent board, and they are enacted under the Library Act. And so it was a decision by the board when they saw fit to reopen. As you know, they did a lot of curbside delivery and pickup during the pandemic, and they decided a few months ago that it was time for them to reopen their doors. And I think decisions around that, when you have an independent board like the library, are certainly based much on the decisions and the process that we use, whether or not they can handle a reopening under their current budget for 2020, and that was the case. So they've reopened, and we're glad certainly that they have done that. Don had a few more questions, but I'll come back to those as we move through the evening. So anybody that's out there that has a question? Okay, I'll move on to Susan. Susan has a couple questions that I'll tie together, and I'm going to ask Mr. Babbage to come on up and say a few words. Susan's question is, would it be possible to eliminate all staff overtime? And is it possible to cut management pay by 15% and eliminate management overtime? So what I would do, Walt, is if you would just respond to that before I turn it over to you, if you could just talk a little bit about the review that's being done on exempt staff compensation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mayor Hall, and good evening, everyone. The first question about would it be possible to eliminate all staff overtime? So I think it's important to recognize that a lot of staff overtime relates to things like significant snow events, water main line breaks, sewer line breaks, and things of that nature. So our infrastructure failures are a big piece of that. Like the water main line breaks we had last January, for example, in the downtown and on Southridge Avenue, where our staff worked through the night in frigid temperatures, -30, -40, to try and get those services back online for residents as soon as possible. So I don't think it would be responsible to eliminate all staff overtime, but we are making efforts to minimize and reduce the staff overtime to the extent possible. The other piece about cutting management pay by 15% and eliminating management overtime. So as Mayor Hall indicated, we do have a city council policy that sets out a process for establishing market-based compensation, including overtime. And we have direction from council to proceed with a survey that's actually required under that policy. As it so happens, a survey that's required every 3 years is due this year, and we have council direction to proceed on that, and direction to report back to council by December 21st. So we've committed to do that, and we'll be returning to council before that date, hopefully. And really, the outcome of that survey will drive decisions both on staff management salaries as well as the overtime piece, and that'll help inform our decisions moving forward after that time. So,
Great.
thank you very much for that, Don. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Walter. One other question from Susan. Is the plan for housing for homeless population still a go? And the quick answer is yes. And I think what Susan is talking about is our integrated health model and the partnership that we have with BC Housing and Northern Health Authority, which is to provide housing but also medical and health services to those folks who are suffering from drug addiction, mental illness, living on the streets. And I know that that project has been in the works for quite some time. I've been talking about it for a couple of years. And I would perhaps ask Mr. Wells, I think our potential start date, Mr. Wells, is sometime in the spring for the first 50 units of housing. And as you all know, this housing complex would be built over on First Avenue where the NR motor site is. And it really was part of what we felt was the best way to address the issues that we're seeing on our streets today. And if you look at providing housing, it was our feeling that housing was really only the first step. And if we were going to do that, then let's go all the way and provide services for these folks, which was integral to what we were trying to put together as a plan. So, Mr. Wells, if you're there, if you could just comment on the potential start date for that site.
Thank you, Your Worship. The potential timeline for construction of that site, it will be in the spring of 2021. They're going through design process right now, and we'll be tendering the project for construction to commence in the spring.
Good, thank you very much, Ian, appreciate that. Now I'll go back out to the Zoomers that are out there. Anybody, sorry, Kevin. Good evening, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you, Mayor Hall.
Good.
And good evening to Councillor McConaughey and Kyle Sampson, two of which I've met before, and pleased to get to know you. I am new here, and I do want to talk about, surprise, surprise, Mayor Hall, a bit about parking in downtown for working individuals, not specifically those that work downtown 9 to 5, rather those that may need to migrate throughout the downtown. Right now, basically, once you park for the first time in the morning, if your license plate is scanned, your 3-hour time limit starts. So if you park at 9 and get scanned, your time is up at noon, even though you may only be in a parking spot for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then you may not park again till 4 in the afternoon. I have salespeople at my office that deal with this on a regular basis. Now, there used to be a provincial registry in which you could register your plate and as a working person. But that ended at the end of 2019. Now, it is my understanding that the City Hall parking system has call it a geotagging system that they could activate that could recognize that somebody has moved from spot to spot, not just one spot, but even across the downtown. But there doesn't seem to be a plan to deal with that. Speaking on behalf of my sales team that is working with downtown businesses, trying to help them survive during COVID, could this be addressed as opposed to parking tickets being issued on a regular basis to those that are trying to work in the downtown?
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. Thanks very much. And we have had that issue for quite some time. Early on, when we did have that potential to provide those various licenses so that people could park or permits, it wasn't that big a problem. But it still posed issues for people who were doing deliveries, people who were with photocopying companies, electricians that were just making quick stops for an hour here, an hour there to do business downtown. We did void a tremendous amount of those tickets. And it was just part of their everyday working life that we had to address that issue. And it was, in the early stages of our system, Kevin, it was a pretty big deal. We were getting a number of those complaints, but dealing with them on a regular basis. So yes, to your question about looking at how we continue to address those folks, and particularly your salesmen who will make intermittent stops downtown but get pinned for a ticket because they're recorded as being downtown for in excess of an hour. How this all started was somebody coming into downtown at 10 in the morning, leaving at 11, and then coming back at 3 o'clock for an hour, and we would issue a ticket. They had recourse through our bylaw services department, through an appeal process, or we would just void that ticket. But yes, we are in fact looking at that system, and it's on the radar and an important one to take a look at. So thanks very much for bringing it up tonight. Appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin. Trudy Clausen.
Yes, hello. How are you doing today?
Hi, Trudy. I'm trying to find you on my screen here so I can wave to you.
No worries. I can just ask my question.
Yeah, by all means, go ahead.
The infrastructure, the question about the, start my video. All right, I'm on. A few weeks ago, there was all I read was the headline about, what was it, $17 million required to fix the infrastructure, like the sewage and water. Did I remember that correctly? I was in the middle of working the election and I didn't have time to read it.
Somebody can refresh my memory. Staff, $17 million to fix infrastructure. Do you recall whereabouts? Yes, the annual average reinvestment for our infrastructure. Yes, that came to us at, I think for Mr. Dalio at our last council meeting.
Okay, so, and that's to fix like things like sewage and water
Primarily
lines,
our
right?
underground infrastructure, Trudy, yes.
Okay, I would just like to point out as various groups, some of which I'm a part of, come to you with needs for buildings and stuff, that really having extra buildings but not having proper infrastructure defeats the purpose. And I really think that we need to get serious about fixing that infrastructure that's underground and make that the focus rather than new capital projects.
Yeah, thanks for that. And our staff have done a terrific job over the last 4 or 5 years doing that asset management review and grading all of the assets that we have, particularly our below ground infrastructure, to determine where we need to look at first and prioritize those particular areas. And I think one example is probably 7th Avenue, when we did the work there for the Parkhouse condo developments. That's the main interchange there, main interchange on Patricia and Queensway. Those interchanges, some of them, Trudy, are 70, 80 years old. As a matter of fact, the one out in front of City Hall, we came across wooden water lines and sewage lines. That's how old they are. So that report is going to drive our discussions at budget time about where we focus our next projects on. So thanks for your comments, and I agree. We need to look at that infrastructure. We're continuing to go after various funding sources with the feds. So the feds have been pretty good to us when it comes to granting on infrastructure.
Okay, well, just keep that in mind when you're, talking
bet.
new buildings and stuff, because I think most of us would much rather have a nice place and have actually clean water when we turn the tap, and we could probably do without another new building for quite some time.
Yeah, I think the other thing we're trying to do, Trudy, is get a balance. We know that we have aging facilities above ground as well. So if we take a look at the rolling mix concrete arena, 60 plus years, and every time I come to work in the morning, I look at that building and think, boy, I hope nothing happens to it, because dollars to be expended on a building of that age are not just hundreds of thousands, they're millions of dollars. In some instances. Even our pool and our CN Center are 25 years plus. It's hard to believe, and they require a tremendous amount of work. So it's going to be a balance for us to be able to find those dollars and prioritize those projects over the budget term. But we're on it, and I appreciate your comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
There was one more name up on the screen. Was it Amelia? Amelia, yes. Good evening, Amelia. How about Azu? Am I muted?
She is unmuted right now.
Azu?
Please accept the
Hello, good
unmute
evening,
button.
everybody.
Hello, Azu, how are you?
Thank you for the opportunity. My request, and I listened to Trudy talking about infrastructures, and I know that there are needs and wants. And for me, I live in a busy area in the Lower College Heights, Malaspina Avenue. And Malaspina has become the main road to access the people who live on Creekside. So this has created a volume of traffic, a high volume of traffic for all the residents here. The problem is not only volume. We know that you want to extend that road forward going towards the Telos building, but the issue right now, and that can be potentially addressed somehow by all the people who works with you, is the issue of safety. The people who drives on Malaspina, coming or going, it drives very fast. And many times we've seen children that are continuously on the road. I know we built a boardwalk on the south side of Malaspina, but still people walks on both sides, whether there is a walkboard or not. So it is a safety issue. The speed continues to be high in this area. And even though it looks like the city has been coming and saying, oh no, there is not enough traffic, there is a lot of traffic, and traffic continues to speed up. And children are at risk, adults are at risk. So my request is, yeah, I know we cannot build that road to Coward right away, but if we could look at the safety issues and how to reduce the speed on this, maybe it's stop signs across in different intersections. But I think you have a lot of people in that area that can help us to think of alternatives for that.
Yeah, good
Thank you.
point, Azu, thanks very much. And I think that Cowart could in fact be a resolution to some of that, getting the traffic out of the area in a different direction coming up Malsapino onto Demano. But again, costly, as you've said. I think that in front of the school, though, there are measures that can be taken, and I see that Mr. Babich is certainly going to take this back to staff and have a conversation about how we can minimize not just the speed, how can we slow traffic down? Is there enough safety measures regarding sidewalks along the school area, which there are? But what about the two intersections that are at either end of the school? Do we do four-way stops? We currently have two-way stops there now, but how do we slow traffic down? There was a discussion about putting speed reader boards in there so that people will know how fast they're going, and they have proven to be pretty successful. We've also had a couple of conversations with ICBC, and I'll get back to Doug as well on Malsapina and what's going on along there. But I think we also have to take a look with the RCMP. I know they're doing steady patrols through all of the schools, particularly in College Heights and up in the Heart. But thank you, and we will follow up on that because it is an issue. It's an issue not just in your area, but all over the community. If you travel Foothills, if you travel Ospika, Demano, the speed of vehicles is unbelievable. You can be, I think, the speed limits are 50 or 60 or 70 kilometers an hour. You're seeing people traveling 20 or 30 kilometers an hour in excess of those posted speed limits. So we will we'll chat with the RCMP about that, ICBC, and Walter will talk to staff about what we can do about that stretch of road. Thank you very much. Amelia, I think you're back.
Amelia is having some trouble with her mic. I'm reading it out for her.
Okay.
Amelia says, I'm grateful that the city is committed to our homeless population, and I am thrilled with the new housing. On the meantime, homeless people are being shut out. There are fewer public washrooms. How are we supporting this population in the meantime while we wait for long-term solutions? And with COVID, especially toilets, homes are top priority. Agreed. But in the meantime, we need to do more.
Good. Thank you very much, Amelia. And I'll comment on the washrooms and showers and storage facilities. The two shelters were providing washroom facilities to people living on the street. They were providing storage facilities for people who had personal belongings and they needed someplace to store those. We went to great lengths to provide washroom facilities, and they're still in the Canada Games Plaza. We have an organization called Pounds who is operating that particular washroom, and we will continue that for as long as the funding's available. Now that you've brought the question up about what do we do today, as opposed to what's happening long-term, a piece of the long-term puzzle is important. BC Housing are putting 50 units of housing into the NR Motors area site as well. So that's over and above what we're currently proposing and putting in this spring, as Ian Wells had indicated. When you take a trip downtown, and I do every morning and later on in the day and talk to folks, a number of folks will not go into a shelter. They're just not prepared to do that. So they suffer through our cold weather experience, and it's disheartening. And you talk to them about why they won't go into the shelter when in fact there's available beds, and the responses vary. A couple of the shelters do outreach work late in the evening to try to get people to come into the shelters or provide them with hot drinks, take them to washrooms if need be. But that's not the answer, and I think what really is the answer is how do we do short-term work until we have the long-term plan in place. And Chris Bone is working diligently for the city. She's with us, one of our employees who's doing a tremendous amount of work on what's happening downtown. So, Amelia, we're going to continue to work on it, and I know it's slow, but at least we've got washroom storage facilities provided for the folks that are living on the street, and we thought that was a big start. Donna. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to ask about the issue regarding bear-proof garbage containers. I live up in the Heart. We've had a lot of issues this year regarding bears. It's escalated this year, but I think it has everywhere. I understand that there was a trial being done somewhere. It would be wonderful if it was a little bit more than a trial. And has anybody looked at other communities, the way other communities have handled this exact issue? And then I'm going to throw one more in there, and that is there any possibility in the future for curbside composting?
Thanks for the last one that you threw in there, because I've been wondering about that for quite some time, and I live in a small cul-de-sac of 5 houses, and I think it happened again this morning when we put our recycling out. My neighbor said, when are you guys going to get compost recycling? So thanks for throwing that in. Gina, if I could get you to respond to the bear-proof containers, and then on the composting side, please. Thank you.
And thank you for the question. So in 2019, the Parks and Solid Waste Services Division started a pilot project for the bear-resistant garbage carts. We put 300 carts out there in areas where the conservation officer said that there was the biggest concern for bear interactions. So they have been out now for a few seasons, and that pilot is finishing up in the next couple of months, and we'll take that information and look and see what we can do going into the future. So we're going to take all that data that we've received. We've done surveys with the residents who have the carts, and then we'll go forward and see what we can put into the capital expenditure plan for future years. With regards to the composting and the pick up in the residential neighborhoods, the one thing that we're looking at right now is a waste diversion study to see what we can do with the different we did a source characterization study a few years back with the regional district, and we saw that there was about 40 to 50% of our solid waste was organics. So we see what that portion is. We're going to do some further studies looking into that source characterization specifically of the organic. So is that yard and garden waste? Is that kitchen waste? Look and see what we can do with that information, but then also the other parts of the solid waste, such as how much paper is still getting put into the garbage rather than being recycled. Once we move through that study, we then look for different types of grants and such that will enable us to move forward with feasibility.
Gina, if I can just expand on that. So on the Bear-Aware garbage containers, will any of that capital expense be on the 2021 budget? And if not, I'm wondering if we can get an update on where that particular program is. And I know that we went through the study, as you've indicated, in 2019, but it has tremendous merit. And I think what we're seeing throughout the entire community, and as Donna said, not just in her neighborhood, this is all over. This is downtown, it's in College Heights, it's in the Heritage area. And so if you could just give some indication about when that might be coming to council. And then the other piece on the compost recycling, is that also a discussion that has to happen with the regional district?
Yeah, so with regards to the pilot, our plan is to provide an update with the report to council on that pilot program. And yes, the regional district is a crucial piece of that work. We meet with the regional district and have conversations about both the source characterization studies that we have done and what we need to do going forward, specifically with the yard and garden waste, because they have a composting facility at the Foothills landfill that they are looking to determine what type of size and such that they need.
So I guess just to add to that, Gina, and we won't get into the conversation here, but I wouldn't mind having a conversation as well with council about what our transfer stations look like with respect to being able to perhaps enlarge them or do some work around them to provide for that waste as well. We do have some, shrub, cardboard and plastics at our transfer stations, but perhaps just a broader conversation about the composting piece of our operations. So I appreciate that. Thanks, Gina, very much. The other piece that I would just add is our bylaw and bylaw department has a bear education program, I understand, Walter, that people can contact our bylaw services department and get that information. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, Donna, and there you go. It's on the list, and we'll certainly follow up through budget discussions, and Gina can bring something back to us to take a look at that. And even if it's it will give us an idea where the main concerns are in the city, but even if we can do something from neighborhood to neighborhood and sort of phase that in over a short period of time. Thank you. Sarat, Daira will read that out.
The next question is from Sarat Gupta, who has two questions. The first one is, I would like to ask over the chat. The first question is regarding Sophie, the Statement of Financial Information. Under the top 20 contracts, there are contracts ranging from 0 to millions. Does that mean that there are no procurement contracts than these 20 contracts that include 2 $0 contracts for 2020? And the second question is about posting top 10 or top 5 salaries on city website. If it is already posted, where can we find it? If it's not, is there a plan to do so? And the city residents who are paying those salaries need to know what we're paying.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarat. I'm going to turn the first question over to Adam Holmes. Adam, if you could respond to that capital project piece. And then on the Sophie side of Mr. Dalio, if you're available, and we do in fact list those employees. All of us are listed on there, as a matter of fact, on the Sophie report when it comes to earnings. So Adam, if I could turn it over to you for the first piece of Sarat's question.
All the information on all the contracts through the annual report, and we bring through quarterly updates through council.
So I'm If I can go back to Sarat's question, it was around, Dyra, a couple of issues where there showed $0 for procurement and capital costs.
That's what it says.
And Mr. Dalio, if I can turn that over to you.
Thanks, Mayor Hall. So our statements of financial information, the SOFI, it's a legislative document that we provide every year, and we have to provide any costs with any suppliers that we have of $25,000 or greater, and we also list the total remuneration for any employee that makes $75,000 or more in a year. And so those lists are listed alphabetically. In those statements of financial information, we have them every year, and we post them on our website under the finance webpage. They're also presented to council every year. Mostly, we do them in June of every year. This year with COVID, it was delayed till August. But every year, in a typical year, you could expect it in June of every year to see what last year's totals were for suppliers and for employees.
Thanks, Chris. Can you comment on that first question that Sarat had on the SOFI regarding the capital project piece?
I heard the question. I had a hard time interpreting it, though. There's a $0 figure reported for vendors. Is that what I was hearing? Yeah. We would only report on people who we know that we paid $25,000 to or more.
Okay. So you were a little garbled there, Chris, but Chris's response, if you didn't hear it, is that what would show on the SOFI report under that particular category are contracts that are in excess of $25,000. They would be reported out. So would it be safe to say that the zero piece is below a $25,000 contract, Chris?
Correct. Total amount that we paid to a vendor in a calendar year was zero or anything less than $25,000. It would not be recorded on those statements of financial information.
Great, thanks very much. And the information on SOFI is still on your finance page on the city's website, Sarat. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to see that. Walter, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Mayor Hall. So in addition to the SOFI report, we do a quarterly report to council on other procurement projects which have been awarded for information. So those are on council agendas and they're available online. So if anyone's interested in looking at other awards that procurement has completed, you can find those on council agendas, and those also include those awards for less than the dollar values that are on the SOFI report.
Good, thanks, Walter. Appreciate it. Heather and Dyra will read this one out as well.
Heather's question states, when will the city start to prioritize pedestrians by putting sufficient money to fixing crumbling sidewalks, upgrading dangerous crosswalks, policing traffic violations that endanger pedestrians, stop letting people block sidewalks with no safe detour?
Okay, thanks very much, Heather. I'm going to ask Mr. Holmes to come back up and respond to the work that we're doing on sidewalks. If we could get a little indication, Adam, on the kilometers of sidewalks that we have. The other piece of this is I think we are budgeted about $600,000 in 2020 for sidewalk upgrades. One of the biggest pieces that we heard from, particularly from seniors who are in motorized carts, were the curb cuts, and I'll use the example around the Phoenix Medical Building where curb cuts were done, I think, in 2019. A huge necessity, and when staff review the various locations throughout the city for upgrades to sidewalks and intersections, they prioritize those and come to council with a budget, and it's council's responsibility to develop that budget and move it forward. So as I said, last year was, or this year, about $600,000. We'll see what staff bring forward in the coming year. But Adam, if you could also comment on intersections, and we've done a few intersections this year with some upgrades that were badly needed. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, one of the things that we did this year was we started a strategy for pedestrians on crosswalks in particular. So there's about 200 crosswalks that we're looking at, and through that report, through that strategy, to get at all the projects would be about $500,000 a year for over 10 years. So right now we have a budget of about $150,000, and we were able to complete 2 projects on Aspika, one at First and the other at Davies. The other thing that, as you mentioned, we have about $600,000 that goes into rehabilitating our sidewalks. We had one very large project up in the heart along Highland Drive, and we do typically between 3 to 5 kilometers a year.
And if I could, Adam, before you leave, do you have the number at the top of your head on the number of the kilometers of our sidewalks that we have to deal with in the city? If not, sorry to put you on the spot.
It's a good question. It's around 208 kilometers.
Okay, thanks very much. If I could just make mention, as you know, there was a pedestrian accident on the corner of First and Ospika. That intersection has been controlled now. We did 18th Avenue in Ospika, I think a year ago, working on Demano and St. Lawrence this year, and it's probably about 2 or 3 weeks from being completed. So that intersection work continues. Thanks very much for your question, and as you can see, it's about safety. It's about how we balance the dollars and the priorities that staff identify. And so, Adam, we look forward to that coming to council in the next couple of months. Joe.
Hi, Your Worship. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Good. Thanks for taking my call here.
Oh, you're welcome.
I kind of had a two-pronged question, if that's okay.
Sure.
One, if for those who don't know, I'm one of the owners of Grasshopper Retail in Prince George, the first cannabis store in Prince George. And one question I have is why is there reluctance, or why haven't we made a bit more defined rules for cannabis retailers in terms of picking locations? The process itself is sometimes up to 18 months from when you start to when you finish, and it's a lot of obviously costs as well. And when you're trying to open a cannabis store, you don't know sometimes where other stores are opening.
Right.
So why don't we say grandfather those who have been accepted already by council, and then start creating better rules for us to follow, whether it be schools or other retailers. So that's my first question is can we kind of do that? I know a lot of us cannabis retailers in Prince George are begging for that. Mm-hmm. Second question is, when we talk about proliferation, I know at the last council meeting for the most recent one that tried to open 60 meters away from Grasshopper, you kind of mentioned proliferation, but I just wanted to, maybe if you could expand on that.
Sure. So let me tackle the proliferation comment that I made, and as you know, I didn't support the one that was going in on George Street across from your place. And I think, my view was at the time, taking a look at the number of cannabis stores within the city, particularly in the downtown core, and how many more did we want downtown. We did deny one that was across the street from Intersect on 3rd Avenue a number of months ago, and really that came with similar concerns, but also concerns that across the street was an organization that dealt with youth. And so I think for the most part, those were a couple of the reasons that one was denied. I think for me, it's about taking a look at how many cannabis stores I want to see in our downtown or don't want to see in our downtown. And that's sort of the basis of the decision I made. But it's also about your comment around giving you more information, Joe, about where other locations are, why we developed that particular policy. And I'll talk to that, and then I'll ask Ian Wells just to comment on it as well. I think we were looking at being able to open up and leave the decision-making for locations based on the proponent. So in this case for you, you decide where you want to locate your site, you come to city, you look for either a rezoning or a temporary use permit for up to 3 years, and that's the decision that you make. And we have heard from other proponents, tell us where another store may open. We may choose not to reopen close by. We don't want the competition that close. We want to go to an area that isn't serviced. And that's been a couple of suggestions that we've heard over the last year. So if I could ask you, Ian, just to comment on the current bylaw that's in place and why we have those measures in place, or I guess in Joe's, his point is why we don't have more measures in place that give them more opportunity of knowing where other cannabis stores will potentially be.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first process to get a cannabis retail license is you have to apply to the province to be approved by them for a cannabis license. So we don't, that is the first process. So they're selecting sites throughout the community, individuals on that basis. So we're not aware of those till they come forward for rezoning. So at that time, we either bring them forward to council for a temporary use if we think there may be impacts to the neighborhood, or we recommend full rezoning going forward. So those are the two processes. We're not trying to regulate business. We see cannabis as a retail product that's legalized. So there is some concerns with the number of stores in the downtown, things like that. So we'll continue to bring back information for council decision. We think that's the best policy direction.
Ian, can you tell us, and Joe mentioned the length of time, so once a cannabis retailer has been licensed by the province, can you tell us what the timeline might be for them to work their way through our system?
Typically, Your Worship, that would be about 3 months, I would be looking at it.
So they come in, see development services staff, and then from there, the report comes to council with a recommendation. And more often than not, we're not seeing many rezonings of cannabis stores. We're seeing the temporary use permit, and it's, I don't know that we've seen anything in under 3 years. That's really what we're being asked to look at. Okay, thanks very much, Ian. You were muted, and for everybody else, he said, yes, that's correct. So thanks, Ian. Joe, does that work? I know you're going to continue to ask development services to be more specific about the bylaw.
Yeah, can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you know what? From a local standpoint, Your Worship, we actually really respect the relationship between ourselves and admin, and we are currently trying to rezone our downtown location.
Right.
Really, what it comes down to is like we have this kind of generic 1.6 kilometer recommendation on the LCLP, but we have stores that are being placed or potentially placed 60 meters away. And we have other applications, like we have other ambitions to open other stores, and we don't know. And to go, like from what Ian Wells just said, yes, it's a 3-month process with the city, but that truly is the last step, if you will.
It is.
Once you get council approval, it's, hey, you're open pretty much,
Yep.
right? So we have a whole year process that isn't really seen. And by the time we get to council, you've dug through the trenches and you have, there's just so much weighs on it. So it's just for a retailer, it'd be really nice to kind of know ahead of time of, hey, don't go here, or this is a bad idea.
Okay.
And it's more just a general concept where if you said, hey, you can't be 250 meters away from a school, you can't be 100 meters away from another retailer, for us, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. Like, you know.
Yeah, so you're seeing a longer process at the provincial level to get licensed, so that's taking certainly more time than what we're dealing with when it comes to you delivering your project to development services. I think one of the things that we tried to do, and I get what you're saying, and I know that Ian is probably jotting this down, and but I think, you know, what you're asking for is a little bit more of a structured approach. And the approach we took initially when legalization came about was to give great flexibility, not just to you as an operator, but to council in determining where these sites go. So instead of putting those restrictions around the bylaw, it gave us a better chance to, really, I think, have a broader look at your application. But I know Ian has jotted this down, and we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't see anybody up on the list. I've got a couple other questions here that I'll get to. And this comes from Susan again. How are we going to cover the shortfall from parking revenue decreases? And I'm going to ask if Chris Delio would come up, but I would also comment before Chris does, and he may say the same thing, that one of the shortfalls in our parking revenue is drastic because of what's happening with the pandemic and the lack of traffic in our downtown, the lack of office workers who are coming to their on-site location and working from home. So they're not utilizing our off-street, they're not utilizing our parkades, so the revenues have dipped. One of the things that we do have is a downtown parking reserve, and that is a potential to use, obviously, when we're doing work on our parkades. But Chris, if I could get you to comment on that, there is it's one of those revenue issues that we're dealing with across the board. No revenue out of our pools, really, no revenue out of our rinks.
Yeah, absolutely. Revenue is kind of the topic of the year this year. With parking runs on its own funding source. So there are two funding sources for parking, and we use them to fund two different types of expenses. So the parking revenue, so things that we would collect from stall rentals, they pay for the operating expenses side of the off-street parking fund. So to pay for staff associated with enforcement and the actual running of the service itself. And then there's the off-street parking levy, which is paid by the downtown business owners through their property tax. And that fund is used to pay for the capital maintenance of our facilities. So that would be the reinvestment into our parkades, for example. So with the loss of the revenue in parking, it's hurting the operating side of the fund, not the capital side. So we've in turn reduced some of our operating expenses to allow for that loss of revenue. What we couldn't do, or what we won't be able to do, we will use, as you mentioned earlier, Mayor Hall, the off-street parking reserve fund to manage the balance.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say as well, through the recovery period, Chris, we're also waiting to see what dollars we're going to get as a municipality from the feds in the province under that recovery umbrella. And we're obviously hoping for a few $1 million to cover off shortfalls both on our parking side but our transit side. Plus, I mean, there's other issues beyond those two particular items. Thanks very much, Chris. Trudy.
Unmute and start video. All right, follow-up question to my other one. In reply to my question about infrastructure repairs and fixing up the sewage and water especially, you said, it seemed like you were saying that repairs to places like rolling mixed concrete would come under capital expenditures, and I just have a question that maybe reveals my lack of accounting knowledge, but aren't repairs and maintenance, wouldn't that be under operating cost or something other than capital?
Well, I'm talking about major capital, so we do know that there are some very significant shortfalls at the rolling mixed concrete arena, and I'll talk more specifically about the floor in there and the brine lines that create the ice. We're concerned that if any one of those go, it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then we would look at that capital expenditure. Similarly, we did the roof a few years ago, and when we talk about capital, we talk specifically about those repairs that would have to be done. We're doing capital repairs now on the aquatic center, on the envelope. So, Chris, did you want to add anything more to that, to Trudy's question?
Maybe I can address the accounting sort of side that she had asked. So we follow public sector accounting board rules, and you're right, Trudy, in that some expenses in regards to a building are repairs and maintenance. So for example, if a door were to come off and you had to repair that door, that's a very minor sort of maintenance to a facility that it would be an operating cost. But if you're talking about a really major overhaul in capital, you're redoing the HVAC of the building, or addressing the building envelope, really major roofs, that sort of thing, that would be a capital expense and not an operating one.
Okay, well because it would seem to me that it would make sense to budget for those years in advance, because those are the things that always come up, right? I mean, any homeowner knows that, right?
Well, and that's exactly what we're doing, Trudy. So when I talk about capital expenditures, for me, it's that huge dollar volume that I'm concerned with. We do account for that day-to-day piece that Chris has mentioned, doors, windows, small equipment, small things that you and I take care of on our house, as you say, every day, every year. We do upgrades, and we do that. We do have a schedule. But for me, it's about that big parcel of capital infrastructure that we need to make 5, 10, and 15-year plans for.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's something I think that probably a lot of people don't understand, because that was a surprise to me, like how you answered that. And it's like, wow, because every building that you build is going to cost you exponentially in the future, right? Because it's not just repairing the floors when they're damaged. It's
Right.
not just fixing the doors. Like a roof is a major, major overhaul, right? And any building that you build has got to have that forward cost calculated in it.
Right, and as Chris said, and maybe I didn't make myself clear enough, Trudy, when I was talking about capital costs, there is an audit process that we've gone through, an assessment of our facilities on the capital side. That's in place. We know what needs to be done, both above-ground infrastructure and below-ground infrastructure, and the age and the areas that we need to prioritize. So I wasn't commenting on the day-to-day issues that we're dealing with from a facility perspective.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, I understood that now. Yeah,
Great,
thank you.
thank you. You're welcome. Heather?
Heather has a follow-up question, and the question is, why are people allowed to block sidewalks without providing a safe detour?
So they shouldn't be blocking sidewalks, Heather. They should be providing safe detour around. If you're talking about a construction site, that should not be happening. If you have those issues, and I know and hoping that you can call our bylaw services, they'll deal with that as quickly as they can. If they can't deal with it at the time, if you could take the name of the company, if you have an idea who is blocking that sidewalk, and if it's been continuous over a few days, please let us know, because we'll deal with that.
She does have a follow-up comment, and she is suggesting that city staff do this.
Yeah, bylaw services is part of our city staff. And are you suggesting that it's our city staff that are blocking the sidewalks, Heather?
Yes.
Again, I would suggest that you can contact 311, which is our service line, and indicate your complaint, and we will have it dealt with. Thanks, Heather. John?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. How is the city going to improve its project management ability? Large capital projects are continually over budget and spending excessively. How can this be improved, and where's the accountability?
Yeah, thanks, John, very much for that. And it is a huge concern of council's, and I'm going to ask Walter to come up. Walter has been working diligently on a process, so I'll get him to make comment on it. But thanks for bringing it up. I was wondering if it was going to come up tonight so that we could have a conversation about it. Walter.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mayor Hall, and thanks, John, for that. I think part of the issue relates to budget amendment authority, and as some of you may know, we do have direction from council to review the budget amendment authority. That's been delegated to the city manager specifically to review that and see how that compares to other municipalities. We've started on that work through the Finance and Audit Committee, and we are preparing to bring a report to Finance and Audit on December 7th. And speaking from my perspective on it, I think my view is that there's merit in reducing that delegated authority to the city manager to a level that's as low as possible, that would be practical without stopping us from getting work done in a timely basis. So in essence, that would put council more in charge of the budget. Council would be more involved in terms of those amendment pieces. And so if a capital project was going to go over budget, we would be reporting back to council more often in that regard. And in terms of the capital projects and their process, we're also preparing to do some work on that, in that we'll be reviewing our capital project management process, comparing that to best practices, and making any adjustments necessary moving forward. So that would include doing more work at the front end to try and get perhaps a more accurate budget prior to the project starting, which would take more time, which would translate to more dollars at the front end of the project, but hopefully that would result in significant improvements, Your Worship.
Yeah, thanks, Walter. And John, if I could, the two pieces that Walter has identified are key to any of our capital projects and the process from start to finish. Council, there's no question, wants to be more information, more controlled on the delegated authority piece, and that's why Walter is doing that work. So if you look at delegated authority, there'll be information he'll bring forward to show us, I think, peer municipalities and how they work. But I think at the end of the day, it's about council having authority over that delegated piece and also being front row center when it comes to any potential overruns on these capital projects. Information coming to us sooner, information coming to us that we can make decisions on when it comes to increasing the budget on these capital sites. Thank you. Is that, John, you're good? Another John.
Good evening, Mayor,
John.
Council, folks watching at home. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. Okay, so we're facing this COVID-19 thing and a problem with funding for the city and increased deficits. Has anybody considered implementing parking fees, putting parking meters back in, start charging for parking? Now that's going to get some people upset. The bottom line is we're living in a user pay world. If we put parking meters back out there and charge a reasonable amount, I think we can alleviate some of the irritation from parking fines, some of the irritation in trying to find stalls to park in during high volume periods downtown. And I think we can alleviate some other parking issues in other areas. Maybe we should also look at putting in ticket spitters for civic facilities, CN Center, the pool, rec center, things of that nature. I think we could turn around and offset a little bit of revenue by charging a bit over a large number of people as opposed to walloping people $50 for parking tickets and them having to contest them time and time again. Yeah. Has the city thought about revisiting the whole paying for parking issue? Because I mean, something needs to be done, and this is one way to relatively painlessly get some assistance as far as getting some funds into the city.
Yeah, thanks, John. You know, I'm going to ask Ian Wells to come up for a moment. Ian is responsible for bylaw services, but I first of all, we have the technology to expand almost whatever we would like to do when it comes to a parking system. And I think the big piece is that we have had a number of people actually, as you've said, propose, why don't we go back to a metered system downtown? It wouldn't be independent and separate meters as we had at one time. It would be meter boxes every couple blocks. People could pay with their phone, their credit card. They wouldn't necessarily need cash. So we've seen these in other municipalities all across the province. And I think for us to move in that direction, John, it would be a conversation with downtown Prince George, who represents the business community, be a conversation with the chamber, and just to get a gauge on what that looks like. I think we're going to hear a lot about this, quite honestly, during budget discussions and the surveys that people are doing, the citizen budget that people are doing. I think we're going to hear about it, and we're going to have to take a look at it. But it would require some work with that consultation piece with those two entities that I talked about. Ian, are you there to make comment on this and whether or not there's been any work done? I do know a couple of years ago as well, John, we did talk about reviewing the new, at that point in time, the new downtown parking program. Ian.
Thank you, Your Worship. You're correct. We've looked at this. We've had initial conversations about a year ago with the Downtown Business Association on where we could go forward on this. I think to involve the chamber. We're looking at some ideas about implementation, how that could occur, and then pandemic hit, and so we did a bit of a reset on this because it just would take time to figure this out, but it's something we are considering, and I think there's some merit to looking at possibly looking at parking meters in civic facilities.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian. There you go, John. It's on the books.
Cool.
Okay, thanks very
That's what
much.
I wanted to hear.
Yep, thank you. I do have John. John, back to John. The other John.
We're tag teaming you today.
Yeah.
Is considering COVID's making it tight and that taxation is getting pushed on to property owners, is it time to explore reducing the levies we're giving to churches, nonprofits, health authorities that reside in the downtown core, and by giving them free tax abatements?
We didn't do that this year, as you know, John. We just dealt with, through Councillor Frizzell, chairs the Finance and Audit Committee, we just dealt with that at the last meeting. The permissive tax exemption is what you're talking about. And I think if we were to look at it, it's just, if it would be my opinion that we just wouldn't look at it for a particular section of the community. I think we're about 1.9 million, and I can be corrected by Mr. Dalio, but I think we're about 1.9 on the permissive tax exemption side, and you're absolutely right, it applies to churches, nonprofit organizations throughout the entire community. So it wasn't something we dealt with. Is it time for a conversation? I think when we go through the budget piece, we're talking about a lot of things, and that could and will probably be one of them. Mr. Dalio, do you want to comment?
No, I just wanted to verify your 1.9 million, and you have a good memory. That is the value of the exemptions for 2021 that was approved in last council meeting. And just to kind of give the audience a bit of information on PTEs, permissive tax exemptions, they are the city doesn't lose that 1.9 million of revenue. It doesn't just disappear. The rest of the community kicks in what was exempted, so that we can all have those sort of social and cultural and arts and recreation services that these organizations provide. John, you also had a comment about the authorities that we collect for. I'm assuming you were talking about the regional district and the school and the hospital. We actually don't have any authority over all of those. Our job is simply to collect those monies on behalf of those other organizations, and then we in turn pay that whole amount right back out to them. So, like I said, we don't have any control over what they charge. They're under their own legislation and their own mandates.
As well, John, that bylaw that shows the permissive tax exemption and the guidelines is reviewed, I would say, almost yearly, and we have great discussion about organizations that aren't eligible. We've turned down a number over the last couple of years, and that bylaw, it's a huge topic around both the F&A table and council table. As Chris points out, there's a number of organizations who depend on that, whether they be churches, nonprofit organizations, arts organizations, cultural organizations. They depend on that, and council has fully supported those organizations to receive that exemption. But in saying that, I say again that that particular bylaw is looked at every year and provides great discussion. So I don't have anybody up on the screen. I've got another question. The last question from Susan: can we really afford to keep all of our arenas open? There would be folks say, can we afford to keep them closed? And we have one closed now out of the 6, which is the Elks Center. We heard loud and clear from the community, and I will stress that the Rolling Mix Concrete Arena, we heard loud and clear from the entire community, not just the Spruce Kings. People were looking to be able to recreate. People were looking because they needed more ice time. That was minor hockey, ringette. It was the public skating side. It was minor hockey. So there's a tremendous amount of users, adult leagues throughout the community. Our traditional subsidization of many of our recreation facilities runs about 45 to 48% a year. We're probably subsidizing some of our facilities now to the tune of 80+% because of the COVID restrictions, the lack of revenue, and the low numbers of people that can participate at any one time in those facilities. So I think it's a big responsibility of the municipalities to provide those recreation facilities, and more often than not, as I've said, the subsidization is in excess of 45%. So we're hoping once we're out of COVID that we see and get back to that normal standard. And I think the conversation has to be had by council and with work done by staff about subsidization and whether or not we want to continue with even that 45+ rate. What does it look like? it means passing on other costs, and I think we'll hear about that as well, going through the budget process, people talking about services in general, and what do we do. So, Susan, I hope that helps. We have Ben and then Brian.
Hello, I just was getting a little inquiry. I live in the Hammond subdivision, and since I've been here in the last about 5-6 years, I know all the roads in the area have been resurfaced, even along Central. And I'm just following up to find out why Nechako Drive and First Avenue haven't been done since 1972, if there's some plan or they're working on it. So it's just one part of the subdivision. It's the original road. And
right.
If there's a point that we should collect names or bring that forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Gina, can you respond to Ben's question about Hammond?
Thank you for the question, Your Worship. So what has occurred over the last number of years is that all of the roads and sidewalks within the city of Prince George has had a road condition assessment done on them. And from that, city staff take each section or each block of those roads, look at what the number that's been given as part of that road condition assessment. They do an on-site inspection, and then they make a decision of which candidates are chosen from year to year to have that paving done. So I don't know specific to Hammond Road and what that condition assessment is, but that is how the candidates are determined from year to year.
Gina, is there a chance that we could get back to Ben in the next couple of days on that particular question, just so he has some idea of when or if it's on the list for rehab work? Ben, I'm wondering if you can get your, how do you want to do this, Dara? How can we get Ben's information offline?
Ben, please feel free to type your number into the chat and I will write that down for you.
Good. Does that work, Ben, if Gina gets back to you in the next couple of days?
Yes, that would be really good. I know this one hasn't been done since 72 when I've talked to the people. So it's just Nechako Drive.
Yep.
And I think it's the original road that was in, and it's usually just full of potholes and they just patch it every year. So I will put it in and I'd love to hear back. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. Brian. Brian.
Yep. Sorry, my question was, does the city have any say in government organizations or semi-government organizations that convert that hand out parking to private companies? So do they have any say in it?
Can you...
Like the hospital is one, CNC is another,
right.
UNBC is another, I think even the airport. So they hand it over to, a private company to manage the parking.
Yeah, no, that's entirely their jurisdiction and not ours, Brian. You made some very good examples. So CNC, UNBC, the hospital and airport all have private contracts with companies to provide that parking.
But is that monitored in any way? Because it seems that the whole business case for letting out this parking is mostly to charge people a fine rather than manage it properly or even maintain it properly. So if they had proper facilities, or proper meters or that function or whatever else it is, or gates or whatever, that would be a more fair system of parking rather than making a fining system the whole business case.
So are you talking about city-owned parkades, off-street parking, and street parking in our process, or the process of these other groups that I've mentioned?
Well, the other groups that you mentioned, but because these are necessary facilities. The hospital
Right.
is a necessary facility. The universities are necessary facilities.
Yeah.
So they can't use it as a cash cow to just and use it because there are no systems in place.
Yeah, and I say again, Brian, that's not our jurisdiction. We have no control over those parking facilities, nor do we have any control over those entities.
But they're government facilities, right?
But they're not our government facilities. As a municipality, as I say, we have no control. They set their own rates, they set their own business decisions, and their own business plans. And at this point, that's what they have in place in those 4 locations.
All right.
Thank you. Dawn had asked a question about accountability to ratepayers regarding overruns on the capital projects. I think, Walt, you and I have answered that. So, Dawn, I hope you're okay with that if you're listening. And guess one more from Dawn. Why do the mayor and council have a hard time saying no to opening facilities, absorbing cost increases, and other actions which are costing the ratepayers money? So I'm assuming from the question he's looking at asking why we just don't say no. I think what we did early on in the pandemic, we closed all of our civic facilities because of the fact that there was no revenue generated. There was no direction given that they would be able to be used by users. Then when we got into, I guess, phase 2, a bit of a reopening, if you will, under Dr. Henry's guidelines, we decided that we would reopen those. And for me, it's a balance. It's a balance between what we can do, and somebody mentioned early on about wants and needs, and I think we heard loud and clear from the community from a mental health perspective, from a pure recreational opportunity. How can we start to open up some of these facilities, because there was so very little opportunity for folks. It wasn't a matter of us not being able to say no. It was a matter of council having to balance the need and the concerns that we saw in citizens not having these recreation opportunities. A case in point is the CN Center, where we had provided, with council support, the walking program that's currently there, and it is costing us dollars. There's a registration process. We have a staff member there monitoring it, and it boiled down to discussions that we had with the Council of Seniors and a number of other seniors organizations in town saying, look, we're just looking for basic recreation and physical exercise, and we think that if you open CN Center, that will help, as we had done in years previous. So, you know, Don, we're going to keep an open mind to what we're dealing with in the pandemic. We know that we have to meet a balance, and we'll continue to do that as a council. There'll be great debate about it, I'm sure, during budget process, but it's not about not being able to say no. Go back to the balancing piece for us. Benny.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, so I'm new. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. So I live right on the top of Oak Street, and I've noticed, especially lately, that maybe ever since the pandemic started, especially, there's a bigger there's more traffic of people with substance abuse, and we've seen an increase of violence in the street. Generally, I do the trails next and behind my place through the streets, and I noticed a lot of problems. Also, we feel with our neighbors, especially the elderly, the retired people, that we visit oftenly, me and my wife, to help them in various activities, that they have a problem in regard to their safety. They're afraid to leave the door open. They make sure there's always another person in the house. And I like to hear from you a little bit regarding to this subject.
So really, Benny, then the safety factor along Oak Street?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Oak Street, there's no question, there is a safety issue along Oak Street, but through various other streets throughout the VLA. And I know that RCMP make frequent calls down into that area, and will continue to do that. And all I can do is suggest to you a couple things. One is that you are vigilant about reporting these incidents to the RCMP. Normally they have very quick response on these incidents that are called in. We have issues with the 7-Eleven area, the gas station, and the store that's on 20th Avenue, but very close to Oak. So that is one suggestion. We are also suggesting that if you would use 311, if it happens that bylaw services can deal with that, Benny, please dial that 311 number. It'll put you directly through to the service center at the city. One of the things that Mr. Babich and I do on a regular basis is meet with the superintendent of the RCMP. And we'll certainly have a discussion with him. I think, Walter, we have one coming up. And we'll point out the Oak Street issue, and I'm sure and know he's aware of it. And it's one of those frustrations, I think, for all of us. How do we deal with not just the issues on Oak Street, but how do we deal with the issues throughout our entire downtown, spreads over into our parks and the outlying areas? And we just continue to work away at it and I guess take ideas from other municipalities, generate our own to try to deal with it. But the best thing I can advise you of is notify the RCMP, and Walter and I will be talking to the superintendent in the next week or so about that area.
I appreciate that. We actually live on the upper side of Oak. It's right next to the Carmeline.
Right.
To that fact, and we're trying to be more active in the community that we live in, me and my wife. So usually we actually go and talk, especially to the elderly people, to make sure that they have anybody accountable for them, especially if we know they're living alone. So we usually will do it in a pleasant way. We bring some food over or offer them help shoveling snow or anything else. And this is our way to know that our neighbors are feeling safe, because we understand it's a problem in this community. But we also noticed an increased traffic of new short-term tenants that are bringing in all these, as people might say, weird traffic of people. Mm-hmm. More cabs are coming into the streets. We see kids with bicycles, not really kids, right? People are moving all over the street. So we would just like to point this out, because there are good folks living here, and the property value is going down because of this. So.
Do you have a neighborhood watch program in your area?
Not officially, no.
Okay. One of the things that we'll do is we'll connect you with the Neighborhood Watch program that the RCMP are actively involved in, so you have some idea what that program looks like, and maybe it will fit. But definitely we'll talk to the superintendent.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any other questions. I'm just going to go through the few that I have here and see if we've missed anything. So we've got one last one from Dawn. What is the mayor and council's plan to reduce costs to offset the potential for a tax increase in 2021? What will the staff reductions look like, and what will the service reductions look like? So let me start with the service reductions. That's what we're doing with the survey. We're asking you to take a look at the current budget. You can develop your own citizen budget if you like and submit to us, but within the budget, we want to hear from you, along with the survey, what areas of service that we're currently providing would you like to see us increase or decrease? So let's throw a couple of the popular ones out there. One is snow clearing, for example. We have Mr. Delio, $8.5 million budget, if you can, I think that's where we're at with 2020.
Has been our, yes, sir. $8.5 million has been our annual snow budget for the last 2 years.
Good, thank you. So let's throw that out for discussion. And the minute we start talking about snow clearing, and in my opinion, we've got a Cadillac service in Prince George, but the Cadillac service costs us dollars. So is there a desire in the community for us to reduce our snow clearing? Or is there a desire for us to reduce or streamline our snow clearing? And if there is, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you so we can put a dollar saving on that particular proposal. So, those are, one example that I think is probably a good example, one of the best examples, a rehab of sidewalks, rehab of streets, potholes, those kinds of things. We'd love to hear back from you on that service level that we currently provide. The other one was what will staff reductions look like? When we originally closed the facilities, and I think, Walter, I'll get you to comment, but I do think I've got the accurate numbers. We were somewhere around 140 employees that were not either scheduled, laid off, or weren't working. We opened up the facilities that required us to bring back staff, and I think currently the number of folks that aren't currently employed with the city is somewhere around 50. Okay. Do you want to comment on that, Walter? Are you good? That's good? Yeah. So we have had staff reductions as a result of us closing facilities, and then as we open them, we see that there is a need to bring those staff back. And I think the other piece of that, Dawn, was what is our plan to reduce cost to offset the potential for a tax increase in 2021? So currently there was a number that was floated out, somewhere around 6.5% tax increase at 2021, given our current gap of roughly $8 million. I think we're hoping for a couple of things. We're obviously hoping that revenue generation is going to occur in our facilities. We're not hanging our hat on that, but that's a hope. The other piece is around the recovery dollars that we're seeing from the feds in the province that I talked about earlier. I think that if we can get our share of those dollars, I'm confident that we will. I'm not sure how much that looks like, but it will certainly give us an opportunity to close the gap. And I talked about the gap on transit and other areas that we've seen a decline in revenues. So that's our hope, like every other municipality, that we can at least apply those dollars to closing the gap and then start to look at where we can talk about services. But whenever we think about reducing the budget in any form or fashion, it involves a tremendous amount of work around various areas of that budget. Trudy. Trudy? I don't see Trudy on the screen. I see her name up. Trudy.
Yeah, it says.
You're on.
Unmute. All right. It said I couldn't unmute myself. Now I'm fine, right?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Well, I'm just asking because you're still there, and it's like, good grief, we've got the mayor on. We've got to ask him questions. I was just interested. I have never heard an explanation of the partnership that you and that the city has with the group operating the washroom facilities for the homeless by the Civic Center there by Canada Games Place.
Yep.
Can you describe that partnership and how it's working?
Sure. I had talked briefly about it a while, just earlier on this evening, but I think it's one to be taken. Taken note of. There was lots of discussion between Chris Bone and a number of our staff folks. How do we provide washroom facilities? Because there were washroom facilities that were being provided prior to COVID through various businesses or a couple of our own locations. When we shut those down, it became a problem. So the idea was to look at various locations throughout the city to provide washroom facilities. The decision was by staff to place it in Canada Games Plaza. There's a nonprofit organization called Pounds that receive funding to operate those, so they are in fact responsible for the operation of that washroom facility, and it's worked out quite well. We've had some issues, there's no question in that area, because of course it draws people to the Canada Games Plaza. We've had bylaw services there, we've had the RCMP having to attend, but we have employed full-time security in the area as well. And that security person is responsible for the library, the closed Four Seasons Pool, the Conference Center, the Art Gallery, Rolling Mix Arena, and City Hall. And that's helped tremendously. But I think it was just an add-on, as I said earlier, to the other two shelters in the community that provided washroom access as well as storage facilities for people that are living on the street. That work? Can't hear you, Trudy. I don't know if you're muted or...
There we go. No, it's... Okay, am I on now?
Yeah, and I've got two others, so if you have one more, I'll answer it and then I'll move on.
I was just wondering, because I've had people tell me that we have almost as many people serving our downtown, like the homeless folk, then we have almost as many organizations as we have people needing the services. And so my question was sort of going in that direction, is there more opportunity to build partnerships so that there's less duplication and so that some of those needs, especially as regards homeless people, could be taken care of by the organizations actually seeking to serve them?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's a tremendous amount of duplication, and I'm quick to point out who has jurisdiction over what, Trudy. Our jurisdiction as a municipality is limited. We can come to the table with property and land. We can come to the table with bylaw services and with the RCMP. We're not responsible for housing. We're not responsible for health care. And we depend on the authorities. We depend on nonprofit organizations to provide those services. I wouldn't say there's a tremendous amount of duplication, but what I can say is there's a great partnership between the City of Prince George, various social service agencies, but primarily BC Housing, the Ministry of Housing, and Northern Health. And we continue to be the impetus to drive that partnership. So when we see organization like Pounds who's prepared to come to the table and say, we can operate that for you, and we have grant dollars, we're going to jump all over it, particularly during the times of a pandemic. So I think there's, I think as we move through this, we see organizations amalgamating together and providing services rather than separately, but together because the resources are greater. So it's a nonstop job, but there's a tremendous amount of support and a tremendous amount of partnership that's going on.
Okay,
thank you. Kevin, and then Daniel.
Good evening again, and Mayor Hall and Council, I first of all should say I'm not envious of the position you're in making these decisions on behalf of our city in any time, but especially during a pandemic. Last 25 years I've lived in both Saskatchewan and then down in Chilliwack before moving here, and Chilliwack is known as one of the cheapest property tax jurisdictions I think in BC, and I'm going to give you guys a pat on the back. When I look at what my property taxes were in Saskatchewan versus the services I got compared to what my property taxes are here in Prince George versus the services I receive, I think there's quite an elevated level of service. I think we've got great recreation facilities, wonderful trails and outdoor facilities, and I think snow clearing is second to none. It is truly a red carpet service, and I'm not giving you carte blanche to raise my taxes anytime soon, but I just want to say I think you're doing a very good job in the short time that I've lived here, and I do appreciate the hard decisions you've had to make this year, so thank you for that.
Kevin, thanks very much. I appreciate those comments a lot. Thank you. Daniel, I'm looking for you. Oh, there you are. Good to see you. Are you back in Prince George, or are you still out of town working?
Hello, Mr. Mayor and City Council. It's good to see you. I just logged in here. Yeah, I'm still working out at Baldy Hughes.
Yeah, good.
It's a real blessing. I'm happy to be here.
Good.
And I got a quick question that I was just wondering. I didn't catch this full meeting, so I've just noticed a lot of the problems now, especially since this pandemic has come in. It seems that the problems have shifted from not the people who are homeless and the ones who are addicted downtown, but I see a lot of serious crime moving into neighborhoods, good neighborhoods. I live up in the foothills area, heritage area, and there's been drug busts, there's been drive-bys, there's been the one house there, they had explosives and stolen property and stuff like that. Now, I'm wondering what the city is going to be looking at, because it seems that a lot of the problems lately it's coming from the organized, not the ones who are suffering from addiction, but from the ones who prey on the addicts. It comes from the gang members and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering what the city's plan is in dealing with this issue.
So we have, and I'll let Walter speak to this as well if he wants to make a comment. Walter and I met with the superintendent, talked about the issues, and there's no question, Daniel, we've seen quite an increase over the last couple of weeks. It's quietened down quite a bit. The RCMP are doing a tremendous amount of work on investigations, just work on being proactive in trying to identify these groups, bringing in reinforcements from the south to help out with the groups that you're talking about, and it is serious, and we're all concerned about it. But I feel a little bit better, actually quite a bit better, since I've had the conversation with the superintendent, and I think that we're going to continue to see that work being done by the RCMP, and they're very diligent about it, and they're bringing forces in from everywhere they need to get on top of it. So.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was just inquiring because, like, I live up in that area. My girlfriend lives up in that area.
Yeah.
She's got 2 kids, a 14-year-old boy, so I kind of worry about them and stuff, right? So thank you. You have answered my question, and I do have to give kudos to the RCMP on what they've been doing. It's good, but I was just curious as to what was happening. So thank you, sir, for your time.
Yeah, you're welcome, Daniel, and good to see you, and thanks very much. Daniel was one of the people that sat on our select committee taking a look at the downtown issues, and your input was unbelievable. We couldn't have got it from anybody better than you, so thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Drop by for coffee.
I will do. Next time I got some time off next week, I'll do that.
We'll social distance a cup of coffee.
You betcha.
Okay, thanks, Daniel.
Have a great night.
Yeah, you too. So I don't have anybody else. I'm not sure what time it is. I think we're about 10 to 9. If there's any more questions, we're scheduled to go to 9 o'clock. I've got no more questions that were written into us. Dyra, I don't know unless you have any there.
No, we don't have any questions in the queue.
Brian Skaken. Can't hear you, Brian.
Yeah, how you doing, Mayor Hall? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to say thanks to all the people, that called in and wrote, and to yourself and administration for organizing this Talktober. I think it's unique times, like you say, and I think this is, it's really opening up the door for another way for us to communicate with the community. So well done. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. So with that, I'm going to thank all of you. And I know this was a different format. There's no reason why we can't do this more often, though I may see some cringes by people who had to organize it, because it is a tremendous amount of work, but I think it was very, very worthwhile. So thanks to all of you. I think there were 60 plus of us this evening, and that's about the same amount we had at the library. I believe we had about 80 people last time we were at the library for Talktober. So thanks to staff, thanks to the organizers, thanks to Blake Productions, and to the folks who really put this together, staff at the city and others. It's greatly appreciated. But more than anything, thank you very much for the participants that joined us this evening. It obviously could not have happened without you. So stay tuned. We've got a number of things that you've pointed out to us tonight, a number of things that I hope you heard that we're working on, a number of things that you heard that Walter's working on from an operational perspective. We'll be well into the budget in a couple of months. And please fill out the survey and do the citizen budget. That helps. So good night, everybody. Thanks very much.